Hey Icon Collective family, how's it going? My name's James Geary, and today we're going to be going over just a few simple techniques that I use every day. They're in my toolbox for really getting your drums punchy, to get your drums to sit well in the mix, and really just to get things sounding proper when it comes to drums, especially in dance music. Good punchy drums makes a huge difference. It's something that I can't stress enough. So hopefully as I go through a few different techniques here, you can pick some things up and add them to your toolbox, and then eventually employ them when you're working on music and come across different situations where you need to make drums and other elements sit better. A lot of these techniques can be used for other things in your mix too. Really anything with a percussive quality, whether it be sounds, cymbals, drums, really anything you want to put it to. Like, please take these techniques, try them everywhere, anywhere, break them, see how far you can take them. It's super fun. So the first main thing I really like to use is compression. As you can see here, we have just a regular snare. Doesn't sound too fancy or anything. It's just a simple snare, and I can't stress enough how much I use glue compression for really getting snares snappy. You can essentially just set your threshold. I like to kind of go extreme and set the attack somewhere to like 10 milliseconds to let just the beginning of the transient come through. Get a quick release to make it nice and snappy. And the cool thing with parallel glue compression is you can kind of over compress it and then blend the two together. So I'll usually kind of pretty much really smack that drum down, and then you can kind of just go back and layer the transient that you pretty much just created through the glue compressor over the original drum. So if you listen to the original drum, it's not too snappy, but as you start introducing the glue compressed signal, it starts to really get just quick, snappy, and right there. Now this works great on drums. I can't stress enough how much I use the glue compressor in Ableton. It's made by Cytomic. They also have a plug-in version called the Glue. It's pretty much the exact same parameters. There's a few more oversampling options in that. But if you're using Ableton, simple enough, just throw on the glue compressor and you can be set. This works great for hats. I use this all the time on so many different elements of my mix. The glue compressor is definitely where it's at. I'm a big fan. There's another compression method you can use, which is pretty much just slamming it. If you have any sort of 1176 emulation, I like the VC76 by Native Instruments just because of the built-in dry knob. While the 1176 doesn't have that by default, the VC76 does, which is really nice. You can just set it to all in mode, put the attack all the way up, the release all the way up, and it'll really smash your drum. But you can start blending in the dry signal and get something kind of nice. It's pretty interesting. It works better on some drums than others. I like using it for fills, for live kits, especially if they are recorded and super dynamic. If you're creating a loud EDM style of mix down, you want your drums to really be compressed and in your face, and the VC76 works great at that. I love using it on fills that are just way too snappy. Really brings out the rest of the drum. And obviously you can play with the attack and release to get some settings you prefer and use that on your mix down. And of course, the one and only thing that everyone seems to really enjoy is slightly blending in some OTT with the time up on peak mode. That can always help a little bit too. Either way, those just a few methods of compression that I like to use. The second approach or tip I have in my toolbox is transient shaping. It's similar, but you're using a dedicated transient shaper. Once again, the Native Instruments one kills it. It's honestly really simple. It's 3 knobs usually on most of these, just an attack and a sustain. You can slowly start to drag the sustain down to make your drum nice and punchy, and put the attack up, and really just adjust your settings accordingly. I would be careful with some transient shapers. Sometimes people tend to overdo it and the drums are just way too clicky and sharp, but I mean, that's kind of one of those things you have to keep practicing, and as you start using a transient shaper more, you'll be able to find which one you like. There's so many different ones. Shack makes one, Native Instruments makes one, and if you're really trying to go a little bit more in depth, the Isotope Neutron one is real nice because you can actually create 3 different bands and do multi-band transient shaping. So if just the bottom of your your drum is a little too boomy, you can kind of drag the sustain back. There's even these nice different modes, such as smooth, medium, and sharp, to really shape your drum dynamically how you want to. Once again, you can kind of just mess around with it and create something real nice. You can remove harshness, you can add more high-end snap, and when it comes to really just adjusting specific parts of the Transient, I definitely enjoy using the Neutron one. But if I'm in a hurry, which I usually am, I kind of like to go back in later and really fine-tune the mix down. Throwing on the Native Instruments one or the Shack one. I think Waves makes one too, the Smack Attack. Always super great and just real quick to get things to punch through. So the third method we have is pitch enveloping. Real simple. I have just a trap like box kick here, and I'm using it in this scenario to add just a little bit more high end to the Transient, because if you think about it, the Transient is essentially just a pitch envelope. So you can go in the simpler and go to the controls tab and essentially set a pitch envelope, which is always super nice. I'm so happy that Ableton has this feature. It makes it really easy to pitch envelope any sort of sample you want. It works better for some samples than others, but if you listen to the before and after, it definitely just cuts through a little easier, which can be helpful. I mean, if you have a mix with a lot of high elements going on or things going on in the high end, sometimes if your kick doesn't have much going on there, it could sound a little bit buried depending on how you're side chaining things. So pitch enveloping is always tight. Now the fourth thing I always like to do is something that just helps your CPU and also helps yourself a lot and really getting an idea of what's going on. And that is freezing and flattening and drawing in fades on drums after you process them. Because once you've done all this shaping, so to say, with compressors, transient shapers, the drum often is not what it appears to be. So you can go in and bounce the drum, just freeze flatten it. It'll not only save you CPU, it'll give you a little bit of a better idea of what you're doing, and sometimes Ableton tends to shift the samples with its delay compensation a little forward or backwards, so you can make sure everything's hitting where it should be right on the grid. As you can see, we're clipping the drum a little bit here, but it can be super helpful. You can also draw in fades then and know exactly what's going on with your drum. The next thing I like to use is super helpful. It works great with cinematic hits, drums that have a lot of reverb, so to say, or, I mean, it works well with kicks, snares, really anything, and that is mid-side processing. That includes anything from like mid-side EQ to mid-side transient shaping. You see here we have this Cashmere Stomp, and we can go in with this Voxengo M-Set. It's a free mid-side utility plugin. Definitely pick it up. It has changed the way I mix. You can mute the sides or the mids, and as you can see, the sides kind of sound reverbed out, not nearly as punchy, a lot more decay, and the mids sound cool, but they could use a little bit more bite. So just by doing that, you can go grab a utility and create a chain by hitting Command G. If you're on Mac, just grab your mid-side balance, set 1 to mono, and if you hold Option and just drag over here, it'll duplicate it. You can also set 1 to stereo, and now we pretty much have a mid-side split. So we can go in and solo our mids and maybe add a little bit of EQ that I already have sitting right here because I'm prepared, and we give it just a little bit more bite. And you can also go in with a transient shaper, make it nice and snappy, and then you can repeat that process for the sides, but you can adjust accordingly and really fine-tune your drum to sound perfect for the mids and the sides. With this method, you can get your drums to sound perfect, especially if you're having any issues with things just not sitting right still, even after compression or transient shaping. Odds are there may be something weird going on with the sides of your drums or the mids. The mids could be completely buried and phasing out. It's really a case-by-case basis, but knowing how to use this technique will definitely come in handy sometime down the road. I end up using it all the time, especially like I mentioned on cinematic hits and things of that nature. If you see, we can kind of snap up our sides here and maybe even give them just a little bit more bite. Boom. Let's do one a little bit more. And then when we unsolo this, it's a night and day difference on how punchy this stomp is. The last tip or technique I have here is something that isn't really necessarily a technical tip, and that is just starting with good samples. It makes all the difference. Now, knowing how to use all of these tools is a huge advantage. You're definitely going to run into times where you need to use them in doing mix downs or creating a song, but nothing is more valuable than starting with good samples. There's so many sites around and so many good packs that there's really no excuse not to just take some time and find good samples. I like to personally do it on monitors. I will look for samples that I know sound perfect on monitors or in a listening environment where I can hear the full spectrum and know that things sound good. And then I can just make a little sample pack like I have here of all of my favorite samples and drums that I know sound great. So when I'm going out and working with other people, producing on laptop speakers, am in an area or studio that I don't know how exactly things sound, I already know I'm going to be starting with good tools and don't have to worry about that later on. Also, a little bonus tip here to get your drums sounding perfect for sidechaining, I like to send all of my returns to a return audio bus. Just got to make sure to disable the sends on there so you don't create an infinite feedback loop. But by sending your reverb, delays, and those returns to a return bus, you can then sidechain the bus in your mix down and make sure the reverb and other returns you have going on are also being cut out while the drums are being played. So with that being said, hopefully I was able to help everyone out. These are things I use every day, and I definitely recommend giving them a try, practicing them, and then adding them to your toolbox. You'll know when to break them out, but like I said, can't stress it enough. Start with good samples, set aside some time to just dig for samples and create your own collection. It'll help you build your own sound, and you'll find some cool things in the process too that not a lot of people have found because you're going out and digging. So, hope you have a great day, and I'm out.